Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 73. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest, this is the minute you said yes to be on the show, I was like, fuck, this is going to be a good one. So I'm going to get out of the way, name and who you are.
I can only disappoint now. Jason Ribeiro, Vice Chairman and President of the Calgary Surge Professional Basketball Club. But above all that, I'm a dad, proud husband, and a really engaged and active Calgarian in a number of different things. And so I'm honored to be part of this conversation, focused on Calgary and some interesting people in it.
Yeah, and I think I don't do any research on anybody, and even on you, I was like, I don't even know where to begin with you because I feel like it's going to go all over the map. The only thing I know is the pro basketball piece, which is kind of how I kind of got onto you, which was cool. You've seen a couple of these shows. So the way we start this off, I like the guests to go back as far as they want to go. Where they grew up, how they grew up, who inspired you, where your parents fit in, where your family fits in, what you're interested in. And then I'll just drag you along to where we are today. And it'll be one of the spectacular podcasts.
You might need to drag me if I got to go this far back. No, it's great to have this kind of vehicle and platform and to see so many great people come through here. That's why you got the immediate yes. It wasn't because I did a lot of, digging into. It was more so, hey, I know this person, good people, great stories, and hope I can live up to it. So, my story begins in Hamilton, Ontario. I was born 89. Interesting time period, like a lot of 80s spillover into that early 90s period. So a lot of my musical tastes and influences sort of come from there as the 90s kind of sorted itself out. And, son of immigrants. My dad grew up in Bombay, India, moved to the UK at a pretty young age. Blue collar guy, which I think was very interesting because his family very much on the academic medicine path. His father was a surgeon, his brother was a surgeon. He more blue collar, likes to work with his hands, got an automotive technician degree. A lot of strikes in the UK during his younger years and couldn't find work, and so got sponsored to move to Canada. My mom was the daughter of a Portuguese diplomat. She was the trade commissioner for Portugal in a number of different countries. So again, odd dynamic where, her father is doing all of these sort of crazy things. Like there's in my grandparents' house, there's this picture of my maternal grandfather and the Pope. And like,
come on,
just craziness. But then again, like there's this tale of two cities, or these two sides to every coin. Her moving to this country quite young at the time, getting an education, especially as a younger woman, was not a given the way it is today, and how far we've come where degree holders are predominantly women. But that wasn't the case for her, and I think her sisters for a large part. And so, working, kind of retail jobs and here and there. And my dad similarly, has that automotive technician's degree from the UK in the Commonwealth, moves to Canada, not worth the paper it's written on. And so sweeping floors.
In Hamilton?
In Hamilton, and around that area. And just both of them, I think, grinded it out individually. Until they met each other through a kind of family function type of thing, and got married, settled down, had me. I can't say that I might not have been planned. I don't know, but had a younger brother 2 years after. And what was interesting was growing up, ethnically ambiguous, if you will, right? I got a Portuguese last name, but my dad was sort of darker skinned, but again, like only spoke English, Catholic, and very much fit in with every Italian family around us, Croatian family around us, which was predominantly everybody in that area. But there was still something different about us, and that for me as a kid was something very hard to reconcile, and I'm sure for my parents as well. My dad coming to this country, being told to sweep floors, but also being discounted in a lot of ways for the way he looked. I think, put a bit of a chip on his shoulder for a long period of time. Same with my mother. You have come from a family that's doing all these aspirational things, and then to be only viewed maybe through the lens of race or the fact that you work a retail entry-level job, I think challenged them and put a battery in their back, and they became, one of the proudest things I have to say is they became very successful in their field. My dad started sweeping floors at a car dealership to then running the car dealership.
No way.
And my mother, who stayed at home to raise us for a number of years, then got involved in the automotive business herself and, won awards and all these kinds of crazy things. And so I think it's the beauty of this country. It's the beauty of hard work, but it comes with a lot of pain. And I think for us growing up, challenging as it was outside of the house, it also kind of cannibalizes you from the inside as well. And so, I look back and I sometimes hear some of the stories on your pod or in others, and everyone's saying this story about like, my dad was my hero and my family was this and everything. And I'm honest, like I don't really have those kinds of memories. And we've, I think, had those conversations about the fact that like, that wasn't our life. It was very sort of isolated, very tense at a lot of moments, a lot of times where, not really safe outside the house, not really safe kind of in the house. And so a lot of my years kind of start, being in that room by myself, navigating and getting the bends and figuring like, how am I going to get out of this? But yeah, that's where it starts. But love school.
Yep.
Good at a lot of things, which was great. And I don't know about you, but like in elementary school, you can do anything. So you're doing art one, period, then you're playing sports, and then you're doing this and public speaking, but everyone does it. Like that's the weird thing about elementary school is like you have such a homeroom of 20 kids. Everyone's doing all the same activities. And so the fact that you had that diversity of interest, maybe that's a kind of through line to today. I loved it. And you then get that competitive instinct in you is like, oh, like I can get the highest grades, or I can win on the basketball court, on the football field, or on the hockey rink. And this public speaking competition I can win. And then for us in our family, I very quickly realized that had currency with my folks. So the more awards that I won, the more talent shows and everything like that, even though the dynamic wasn't right, that kept me in check with them. And so I think, growing up, maybe this is a good point to pause, was like the incentives were kind of off. I didn't feel as though there was this kind of unconditional, unwavering, and maybe there still was.
Yeah.
But not in the way that I think other kids describe with their folks. But I did know at the time how to, the cheat code was as long as I keep these awards coming through, as long as I win these chips, as long as I'm presenting in the right way, we're good. But at the end of the day, that's all showy stuff. You can tell your friends about it, but I'm going back to my room by myself and reading a book, putting my head into the boombox and like listening to, Howard Stern too, way too young to be listening to it on the radio, and living kind of in my own world. So it was an interesting looking back on that time. And
when you're in it, you can be very reflective now and kind of like, break it down and kind of be thoughtful about it. But at the time, there's a lot going on at a young age to be dealing with. Yeah. It's almost like split lives.
Oh, huge. That duality of no idea, like has framed so much of my life. Like to this day, like I've got tats on only one side of my body because I've always felt that kind of duality, or that there's this kind of painful or more darker side to like the beautiful, blissful life I'm able to lead now that I've worked really hard to get to. But you're right. Like when you're a kid, you can't be that reflective. You just know like why is my dad saying these things to me? Like the most visceral, like horrible things that I've ever heard to this day sometimes.
No way.
Yeah. And the challenges sometimes of me, I may not be able to come home. Like I was that kid in high school where sometimes like I probably couldn't come home. And so I was staying with a girlfriend or staying with a friend.
I think it was stress. I think it was stress in their lives, or the disappointment of coming here and starting at the very bottom and restarting, and that kind of pressure and you unfortunately the house was this outlet.
Yeah. I think it's two things. One is you're right. I think if you're dealing with a lot of pain and you don't know how to channel that, it's going to get out somewhere. It may get out at work. It may get out in the home. It's going to come out, and you won't have a governor on you to kind of deal with it. And I think part of that is the time and the era. Now I think we're a lot more aware. But I think that's part of it. Second thing I think is like people are predisposed to being parents in different ways. Some people, it's their dream. Some people, it's not something they've ever really considered. And so when it happens to you, it's kind of fight or flight. And, you put boundaries around what that kind of looks like. And so, I think my parents were very involved, almost on top of me in a lot of ways, and then very distant in others. And that all of that gets exacerbated by stress, to your point. So I think for me, I couldn't navigate it at the time, but I knew something wasn't right. Like I knew in my bones something wasn't right. Like I was smart enough, I felt, to feel like, hey, this is for now, and I got to get out of this, and I got to get that space. And I will, like, even fast forwarding now, I'll say much more productive, a lot of space in between, but much more productive relationship. I think they'd be the first to admit that. But I think it comes down to the core of not everyone is predisposed in this way to be a parent.
Yeah,
it is such a treasured and kind of reverent role that you have to play. And if you don't treat it like that, it will look like everything else in your life. And then the stress comes in and all that kind of stuff. So I've sort of put that at peace. I made peace with that kind of thing. And through a lot of work and counseling and therapy, but it set off like a really tough period, especially when those incentives run out. So I don't know about you, but like,
dude, I didn't win shit. So, so we'll just be clear of that.
Yeah. So I go on this Kobe-esque run of just like, I'm like the valedictorian. I'm like the
no way.
Yeah. Like,
oh, you did it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah. So like I don't even know, if there's a lot of merit in being your 8th grade valedictorian, but like winning, like our school board had like directors awards and championships in sport and all this kind of stuff. And then there's that jump to high school, right? And so, one of the points I didn't touch on was, while they're on top of you and while there's this, things aren't going well, there's also this like big level of protection. And that's another form of, I think, care. In its worst form, it's a form of control. But my parents were very like protected. Like I couldn't really go anywhere, very isolating. So when I say I was in this room, sometimes I was in this room not by choice. Like it was just because I couldn't really do anything with anyone. Like they didn't trust, I think, a lot of people around them. I wasn't allowed to trust anything with them. And if I'm coming home and only telling them the most visceral experience of like, some racist thing that's happened to me, or this kid, sometimes kids are just, shitty to each other.
Yep.
They're like, okay, all bets are off. You don't talk to that person. I'm going to talk to this parent or whatever. And I remember, and I think also they liked that element of there being a little bit of a distance. Like I'll tell you a very visceral story. And this maybe, sets off what was about to happen. So there's this kid I could not stand in elementary school. And I don't think my parents really cared for their parents either. Very keeping up with the Joneses type of situation. And I remember going out, and you used to not have a lot of things to do at recess, but one of them at our school was like you would play red ass with a tennis ball. So basically you throw the ball against the wall, and if it comes back and someone else bobbles it or doesn't catch it, you have to run back to the wall, tag up. But until that moment that you've tagged up, someone can throw the ball literally at you. And so, kind of violent to think about because we played with like a lax ball sometimes, and it wasn't as comforting as a tennis ball. But I remember coming out for recess, and I was doing something inside, and I came out a little late. And someone had to bring the tennis ball. So one time it was me, so one time it was a different kid. But this kid that I wasn't crazy about, and we always like for days we played this every day. One day, this kid is the one who brings the tennis ball. I come outside a little bit late for recess. Comes off the wall, I grab it, and this kid stops everything. He says, whoa, 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 whoa. You're not allowed to play with my ball. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I'm here every day. No. It's my ball. You're not playing with it. Not for you. It's mine. And I looked at him, and with like such assuredness, I took that ball and I threw it on the roof of the school. And it just shut it down. I shut it right down. And I remember, look, 10,000 foot view now. Parent comes and sits down with you and says, well, listen, I understand that there's going to be things that people do that are mean or unkind, and you can't kind of take matters into your own hands every single time. And put that at least into context. I don't know if I've ever seen my parents more proud of me. Like you know what I mean? Like they just like, you didn't take it. Maybe I have to buy this ball. I got to buy 3 balls or whatever for this family. But like, I heard them debating this. Like I was in another room and they were talking about it. I'm like, good for him. Like I heard them say like, good for him. Like he did this, he stood up for himself. So again, like how do you get any sort of moral code or value from out of that? And that's the most like palatable version of one of these stories. There are others. So, high school hits. You've been a little bit isolated from, the school experience other than when you're there, which is great. But no one gives me the cheat code for high school. So now it's not you in this class of 70 kids, one in each sort of one with one teacher, one with another 30.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And now you're in like this 1,000-person situation. And I didn't know where like to sit or what the rules were. I just figured like, hey, I'm sort of like one of the in kids because I'm doing all these things. This is just going to repeat. And it didn't. And there's less things to win. Because it's not as closed, it's niche.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as that currency kind of ran out, you realize things are fracturing in a really major way. So they're fracturing because you're not enjoying your time at school, because you can't throw yourself into everything.
Yeah.
You choose one or two sports and that's it. Or you choose one club and no one was there to sort of navigate that. And then at home, you have less of these tangible things to keep the fuel going in terms of that, hitting the ball back and forth with that parent.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of just wondering why aren't you bringing home these chips? Why aren't you? And so that was a really things kind of get off the rails. I can feel myself kind of losing control.
Mm.
And you fall in with the wrong crowd. The desire to be the same as everybody is really overwhelming, but the same you'll take anywhere. So if it's the stoner outside of the Blockbuster at that time, you'll take it.
Yep.
If it's this and you become this chameleon, but all in the wrong ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, that sort of perspective of, I make this joke with my wife all the time. It was a scene in Batman where, Batman's fighting Bane and Batman switches off the lights. And Bane goes, "Oh, you think darkness is your friend?" I was born in the dark, molded by I genuinely talk about that duality, that pain or whatever. There's a part of that is like I'm still that kid in that room and by myself, navigating this all on my own. And the moment there were outs that were not as productive, but allowed me to kind of numb what was going on, I took them. Mm. And that sort of was I think a huge challenge to undo, but certainly colored a lot of those high school or early university years for sure.
Mm-hmm. When you're kind of like in between groups, you're looking for someone to connect with and trying to like, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this. Is that all of high school? And then you just kind of get out of it and then you're just, have any sort of plan, or are you just...
No, I think my parents had grounded me enough to know like, hey, you're not gonna, you can't fail to like the degree of failure that they were considering. Like for them, I think like lawyer, doctor, those kinds of things. That was the plan.
Yeah.
Like there's one or two options. And I like you're talking about two blue collar-ish people, like they don't even know what that means. Mm-hmm. They just know what it signifies. Mm. So that's the path. And so I was like, okay, well, I can do, and by the way, like I'm still treading water, but I'm still like above water. Like I'm still above the sort of line. Like I'm still doing reasonably well, honor roll type of thing. But it's like, but I got a fake ID at 16. I'm driving to Toronto. And I'm doing this during, and what was worse about it was like, by the time you get to 11th and 12th grade, I had second period with one teacher, lunch, and then fourth period with that same teacher. So whatever I did during lunch, I came back with at fourth period and he knew, right? So like there was no hiding it or escaping it. But yeah, I do think it was like this, it was still experimenting because you still don't fit in any of those groups. Yeah. You're a traveler, and I found a friend that was kind of in the same place and we just kind of did our own thing. But again, like, sometimes pretty dangerous situations. Yeah. And so I knew I was getting into university. I was kind of given only one option because McMaster was 20 minutes drive from my house. So the idea of me going away made no sense. Wasn't really an option. So I got in, and then the goal was do anything that I can stomach, because right now I'm like not in a good place. But to fast forward at least to like what threads or through lines exist to today. I remember so I'm commuting to Mac. I did live there for a year, but prior to then I was commuting.
Were you working? Were you working in like?
Yeah, I was a waiter and a bartender.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of former bartenders on the show. Mm-hmm. And again, that's not a great. That's a good and a bad influence at the same time for what I have going on.
Yeah, especially when you're willing to go down those paths and you work in those environments, just like a playground.
You can't say no.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that was, I think, by design as well, that I found a thing to do to earn a little scratch, but like the hours are long. There's a lot of breaks in between that you can get up to no good. And there's a lot of things going on in a bar like environment. So you can get away with more.
Yep.
And there's, just lots of things that are flashpoints that like I try and not even think about. It's just like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing that I was even involved in this. I'm working. But yeah, like, so that's in the background. But then I go to university and it's the first year of university is the year that Barack Obama is running for president. And I remember being, even in Hamilton, Ontario, being very, like, I would see his posters, like in
those like 4-color ones?
Yeah, the Hope ones, like in our university. And I'd always, even as a kid, been very fascinated by a good speech, by a good leader. Like that ability, I think it was control, like the ability for these presidents or these people that I'm looking at in a position of authority to make a decision. And these are 50-50 calls, but we trust them enough to make the decision. And here's like me and my most untrustworthy point. I still had that appeal of being like trustworthy and seen as that and someone who could rally people behind. And so I have that in the background. It's this tease.
There's a lot going on.
Lots.
For years.
Lots. Yeah. And it's all blending together, right? And so, but you're not making sense of any of these things. You just have these influences. Even like in my peer group, very, hyper masculine group, sports, athletes, etc. But my interests deviate a little bit. Like I remember in Mac taking like art history courses, and I was one of the only men in the group. I remember, the music. I would listen to Sinatra like all the time.
No way.
And it was very like loving Ira Gershwin sort of songs, and like being like called out about that in a lot of ways, but feeling confident enough to like keep these pieces of myself. So I didn't lose the entirety of it, but still like that's another caveat of like, oh, he's not one of the boys, type of thing. So I go through this period where my first year university, I'm barely showing up to no good. I think I got on academic probation to even get into my second year. I, managed to get a number of like courses that I didn't even write the exam for canceled from my record to allow me to go into my second year and third year. And I just grinded out. And one of the things that's like saved me in a way was I got hired at this camp, and it was working with kids, and it was a sports fitness school. It was really, high athletic performance school, but still like accessible. And I was working with kids of all ages and all backgrounds, and it had put a little bit of a governor on me, not a total one, but a bit. And I'm still bartending, doing all that stuff, but I remember thinking, whoa, maybe teaching is the thing that's going to be the thing that I do after this. Maybe it's not law, maybe it's teaching, and then, but I still have that battery in my back of, oh, but like, are you just going to be a teacher? Are you going to be a principal? Are you going to be a superintendent? Like, there's those trophies, right?
Yep.
So I'm like, but I could see that, so I'm going to do that. And so I grind it out. I somehow get out of those years at Mac intact. And I'm like, I'm going to Toronto because I'm there literally 80% of the time anyways. And I get in and I pack up my bags and go to Toronto. And that's how I found myself there.
What'd you graduate with?
So I graduated with the two things that I could only stomach doing at the time, which were a major in honors history, because I was fascinated by change. I was fascinated by change over time. And I think there was a little bit of that politics bent to it, the war, the history of decisions. And I took everything, Canadian history, but also like the history of labor unions, like the labor of work, the history of Indigenous Canadian relations. Like I was taking these very, very early on. And then I coupled it with a minor in religious studies because I had these pretty philosophical, existential questions. And I think as things are spiraling around you, it sometimes forces you to think about that. And I was like, oh, I could do that. And at its most transactional, I was like, okay, I was raised Catholic, not practicing. But if I ever taught in a Catholic school, I could say I did a religious studies degree. But I took like skepticism and atheism. I took death and dying. I took divine female god. Like I took everything. So even still, like there's this through line of me saying like, I'm not just going to do one thing. I will expose myself to everything that I think has carried through. Because I knew people who took like, the very bulk linear courses in their degree. And I was like going all over the place because I wanted the fulsomeness of that. And the parallels that I could see, even at the most diverse points, I think have been hugely advantageous for me today. So those are the two things that I took into Teachers College when I moved to Toronto.
It just sounds like a tormented time. It maybe not like tormented might be a big word, but like just balancing it all, like
it was.
And like lucky to be out of it, to come out like you said, unscathed. Like
it's, you go back, especially now with like head on straight. You try not even look back, because then you have to like look at these micro level decisions that you made and people that you hurt or people that you might have hurt. And the torture that you gave to yourself and put yourself through. And it's hard to reconcile. And the only thing that's helped me sort of view it in a healthy way is just hearing so many stories, even in in our own community in Calgary and Alberta, those struggling with addiction, to this day, that, this is it's hard to see outside yourself. Yep. And I wasn't someone who took a lot of solace in saying, oh, well, there's someone else going through it too. But I do now. It gives me a little bit more, a heck of a lot more, I should say, empathy for what's going on, and saying like, there's got to be more productive ways or cultural ways that we reach people before it's too late. Because there's another version of this story that's 100% a tragic tale. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so I actually, when I get into Teachers College, I get sort of
this is in Toronto.
Toronto.
Okay.
So I've moved the boys who are all doing different things at Toronto. We all kind of moved at the same time.
Where'd you live in Toronto?
So I lived the first place that I lived was in the financial district, just off King Street East. And it was one buddy and me looking for our place, because he had already beat me there. He was already living there. So I was living in a walk-in closet. And it was so awful, because it was a space like from the living room where you had to walk through the walk-in closet to get to his bedroom. And so like, it was just like...
Was it glass doors? Like, was it like...
No, like it was sliding doors, okay. But at least I had that going for me. There was some realm of privacy. And we're like, hey, this is a month. We're going to find our own place. And so a month goes by. He's dragging his heels, and I'm just like, I got to get out of this situation. So another buddy of mine says, hey, get out of that situation. Come with me. I'm living in this place, not as great of an area, but couch it for a little bit. And so I'm on the couch there, but I'm prepared to get my head on straight. Like, this is the first time that I'm like, okay, you have this chance. I didn't think I was going to get into Teachers College. Yep. And I know I'm a bright guy, but the damage was done. Mm-hmm. Like, I was not finishing my exams. I'm on academic probation. Mm-hmm. Like my buddy and I we were right preparing for an exam in the library. And the first tattoo I ever got was like, nah, we're going to cancel this course. And I walked out and got a tattoo. Like, it was so like flippant and visceral. And so now I come in first day, I got the tie on, I got the shirt on. Everyone else is kind of in sweatpants and whatever. And I instantly know, like, oh, this is not going to be the like sort of competitive, structured, like, put a battery in your back moment for me. This is going to kind of be more of the same. And I remember very early on, one of the supervisors of the program took me aside and said, you will need to go do a master's. And I said, why? She's like, the questions you're asking and how you're approaching this opportunity will not be how others look at that. And that's neither good nor bad. But I just know that I don't want you to walk out of this thinking like there's nothing else that's going to get your gears going. And I took that away. But it's for the next year, I was like, okay, this is not going to really do it for me. I love teaching. I love being in with the students. I love coaching. But I just knew it was not going to be like this professional moment for me in Toronto as a big boy. And so that space, that vacuum, again, accumulates with not so great things. So I'm couching it. I said, I got to get off this couch now. And I found a place, I swear to God, everything's coming back to tattoos. So 550 Massey Street, it's off of Bloor and Ted Rogers, which is Jarvis, where the Rogers headquarters is in Toronto. And it's this old apartment, and it's a studio, $860 a month, but it's only available December 1. and it's now like September-ish because I started in August. And I said, I'm going to commit to living on this couch for 3 months to see, because I cannot compromise. I want to live alone. I want to live in that location, which is insane. For that price, I'm willing to rough it out. So I waited, slept on the couch. 3 months on a couch every day, up to no good, and got through that to this place. And it was, my unit was 601. And it was the first place that my partner at the time and now wife, she moved in. She was 4 years my junior. She was at Western, and it was the summertime, and she was like, hey, I'm going to move in with you. And that was like our first place, like young and in love in Toronto, and still like, again, like the most visceral form of young love, like not all sort of rainbows, but I remember, and so I got the numbers of that apartment. It's 601 was the unit number, but the 6 had been knocked off because the screw was loose. So 6 is like this. And I tattooed it like that on my 601.
Why? Like, everyone has memories.
Yeah.
That one, to take it to that level, to get a tattoo of this like, what was it? Was it this, is this the swing point when things started to change?
Yeah, 100%. And I didn't want to forget it. And I remember, so I get through teachers college. I take my supervisor's advice, like you should go do a master's. I apply to go do my master's in a couple places, and I get in. But in a master's in this context, in education, you can do a course-based master's, which means that you just do your courses, and at the end of the courses, you get a master's. In a lot of other disciplines, when you do a master's, you do research. You write a thesis. And that enables you to go do a PhD in research as well after. They won't take you if you've just done a course-based master's. But course-based sounded easier. So I'm like, I'm just going to do the course-based, I'll get a master's, and then maybe I'm a principal or something. And I remember sitting out or standing over my balcony. My balcony looked over almost like the entire city. And I looked at myself in a kind of very self-loathing kind of mood. And I said, you're 23, 24 years old, and you've never actually pushed yourself into a position where you may fail. You've pushed yourself into a bunch of dangerous situations. You've pushed yourself out of your comfort zone in a lot of negative ways, but you've never actually taken a risk. You've always just done the bare minimum, knowing that whatever natural gifts you have or talent will save the day. And I remember I left the balcony. I called Brock, who had admitted me, and I said, and it was probably a month before I was about to go start my master's. And I said to them, is there any way you would consider me for a thesis and not the course-based master's? Because I want to push myself, and maybe one day I'll do a PhD. And the person said, I'll get back to you. They re-reviewed everything, and I filed a new application. And they called me, and they said, we're happy to admit you, give you a scholarship. And for the first time, I'd introduced a little bit of wiggle where I'm like, I may fail. This is terrifying. I'm not doing the minimum more. I have to lock in. That was the switch. And I came to that decision in that apartment. So the 601 on my back is not just because of all the craziness that involved being in Toronto at that point in time. It was also because that was a decision-making point that I did not want to forget. And I didn't want to forget where I was when I did that. And that kicked off, meeting this incredible mentor that I have at Brock, takes me under her wing. And again, now I'm like reconciling and reconnecting with that part of me that I haven't, been in touch with since I was a kid, which is, even though that was the currency with my parents, winning all the awards, et cetera, research is kind of like that. Like research is all competitive funding. Research is all awards. Research is all performance. You even talk to professors today, they may come off, sort of very, wonkish, but their whole job is based on being the best in the country or in the nation or in the world in accruing competitive funding and winning awards, et cetera. So I had this opportunity on my own terms to reconnect with this kid, and not for my parents in this kind of context, but for myself. And maybe I sort of found myself being like, well, maybe you are still that kid in the room that wants to compete, that wants to perform, and maybe it's not for anyone else. Maybe this is your kind of Kobe Bryant ultra competitive moment. And now, even though there was this stop and start in Toronto that you thought it would be in teachers college, maybe this is it. And I hit that hard.
How do you, at what point in your life have you been able to reflect on all this and like you got this lasered, like this is like I don't know how much work it's taking you to get here, but you're like laser focused in a way to explain this, which is just,
it's,
was that impactful? And it's just like, it's forever etched.
I think it's forever etched. Like, you know, people don't mention this, right? But when you're in the cycle of addiction and you're also like dealing with all of these insecurities, whether they be warranted or not, based on race, based on fitting in, based on teenage angst, whatever you call it, that toxic kind of cocktail also, you know, forget about any purpose that's driving that. It also makes you a liar.
Mm.
It also makes you fundamentally dishonest. It also means that you're constantly, again, at its most sort of innocuous, keeping up with the Joneses type of like, hey, I want to show myself in this particular way. At its worst, you create this kind of duality where there's this character and this character kind of consumes who you are. Or you don't know who you are.
Mm.
And those years that I've talked about, I don't know that guy. Like that's the duality. That is the concoction that came from all of that time period. And so maybe the laser focus in it is, certainly I've gone through, counseling, and I'm indebted, like so many others are, to the fact that we have services available to go through this. And I encourage anyone who's going through those challenges, or even as a parent, has a kid, like these things, they weren't as, light bulb for me, like they totally helped. I know they didn't hurt. I know that they didn't hurt. I know talking about it, saying it out loud to someone who didn't have skin in the game, wasn't, motivated by something, or wasn't too close to the situation, helped. And so maybe that's part of it, but otherwise it's because it's just this like dose of honesty that gets put into you. And you're able to sort of look back with laser focus and say, I know I did this because of this. I can reflect on these choices now because here I am now and I'm at peace. So it's not practice, certainly, but I think it's very like right under the skin, accessible to me for sure.
It's got to be comforting for you now.
Yeah.
Just like you just did that. I was like, I can see it coming off your shoulders. Like,
Yeah. It's, and you have no idea, like for people who are mired in this, how much more of you, like people ask, like, that moment, right? So I'm at Brock now. I'm killing this. Like I'm laser focused. I'm all in it, but I still got some of the bad habits. I've written off some of them, but they're still looming. And at a certain point now, the dichotomy exists. Now, finally, I've got this amazing mentor who is seeing me for like the fullness of me, trying to encourage me to do other things, putting me in positions to win, this sort of unconditional support that I've never really had. And then I still have some of these challenges where, I'm, the bottle of Johnny Walker is still in the car, or I'm, writing this essay and, I'm not, totally in it while I'm doing it. And at a certain point after a year of that, I remember it was a very sort of, again, you talk about moments, another tattoo. I've got the word moments on my ribs because I've always been fascinated with that word. And maybe it's the history side that I talked about, change. Like change is, in history, is a study of these decision points. Change is a study of these moments. And I always wanted to be open to these moments. At any point, I knew things could change. Like you talk about, some of the things I rid off. So I was a very young age, I was smoking cigarettes, Belmont, and charcoal filter. I was convinced like the charcoal filter made a difference, right?
It's going to save you.
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, the most expensive, especially in Ontario, that I'm buying. So I said to myself, I'm going to smoke until it doesn't make sense anymore. But everyone says that. And I remember I was at the Jay-Z, Kanye West Watch the Throne tour. And I've got all these tickets. My whole crew is going. And my partner at the time, at ACC, now Scotiabank, you get fined if you, I know this from experience, you get fined if you smoke indoors. So you get enough of those fines, you say, I'm not going to smoke indoors anymore. So I remember I'd have to have 2 cigarettes. It doesn't matter if I'm going to a Jays game, Raptors game, I have to have 2 cigarettes before I'm going in. And then that'll tide me over, or I'll go out in an intermission. This one, I knew I wasn't going to leave the concert. So it's snowing, it's freezing. I've got all the tickets in my pocket. And everyone's lined up, like kind of ready to go. And I said, hey, hold on, please. I've got to have my 2 darts. Come on. So I undo the packaging, and I'm looking at this whole crew of like 8 people who are relying on me. They're shivering, waiting. I see this girlfriend of mine at the time, like completely shivering and like dutifully like waiting with me. And new pack, take 1 hit, and like everything that was all in the ether just became 1. And that drag hit me the wrong way, mentally. Tossed the butt, threw out the pack, never had a cigarette again.
No way.
So I was always open to change and signifying in moments. And I probably had the tattoo, I think, even before that moment. But I've consciously been aware of that. And so, talk about another moment. I'm at this conference with my supervisor. And, this is a world that I don't know. So they've got like these, world-renowned chefs there. There's all these people. And there's this one woman who's come in from the United States, this big, international title. I don't even remember it. And my supervisor is introducing me to her. And she's from Nashville. And my supervisor is such a wonderful person. She made such an innocuous comment. And my supervisor has seen me enough to know, like, when we go to these conferences, I'm always in control. I'm always professional, but I'm throwing them back. And she introduces me to this woman and said, hey, this is the president of so-and-so. This is my graduate student. You're going to love him. He really knows how to throw them back. And I remember it was such an innocuous comment. And the person from Nashville loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I was mortified that I'm winning all these awards, like I'm doing all this amazing work. I want to be known not as this like degenerate guy, not as this character, not as this the worst sort of things that I could say about myself because I'm my biggest critic. That's how I was introduced in that context. And she didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Like, it was such an innocuous thing. And I remember leaving that conference. I remember thinking about it for like a day or two. And I took my partner aside, my now wife, and I took her out to dinner in Toronto. And I said, I think I want to stop drinking. And I had not sort of prepared her for that moment. And she had seen me navigate through this, very supportive. And a day later, I stopped.
Wow.
And it's now 8-9 years later.
Crazy.
Moments. And so it was a moment. And so I've been always open to the moment. Now these very visceral, challenging moments have given way to amazing moments. So everyone talks to me about like how troubling that must have been or how challenging it was. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever done. I've never reconciled it or had to go back and sort of reconcile that decision. It's been beautiful. The weight has lifted sort of off of my shoulders. It's come with these kinds of challenges sometimes because now you have to sort of learn how to live kind of without it. And there's a physical sort of challenge that you go through in the most immediate term, but anything that you see me doing, impossible without making that decision. And certainly with the support of my wife and great people.
Just like, it's one of those, your story's just getting going, right? At how young you are and where you're actually going. And like,
yeah,
it's just going to get crazier, isn't it? Like that one moment is, like you said, it's going to allow you to pull off everything that you want to.
Yeah. And you don't even know what that is still, right? So fast forward. So I finish up that master's, win all the awards at, it was actually like
you were really, like you were that dialed that you were.
Yeah.
Once you're all in on something, you perform at a high level.
And I can't see it any other way, but also it's not about me, right? So like I talk about those influences of seeing Barack on a university campus, this commitment to something bigger than myself. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what service was. I didn't know about being a community member. All I knew was, when I was coaching some of these kids, I felt good, but my life wasn't in order. So it was this, dichotomy that I couldn't reconcile. And the kids that I coached predominantly were the kids with special needs. The kids that had been knocked around or hadn't been given a leg up, or you needed a heavy amount of discipline to coach. And so I'd been given, and even the things that I was doing in my master's, I was still giving back and sitting on committees and volunteering. Like I fell in love with community. And maybe that's the obsessive, addictive personality, and it may be just geared that way. But I would rather that be the infectious, obsessive thing that I have than any of the other things I was up to before. So you find purpose in that. And so, yeah, I'm dialed in from a performance side. I'm competitive, but I knew at the end of it wasn't, oh, Jason wins all these awards or Jason gets all this funding and look how great Jason is. It was, no, that allows me to do more things of impact for things beyond myself. And so, yeah, like it was, I remember at my graduation for my master's. It was like ludicrous. Like they had to like at convocation they read out your name and then they read out if you've won any like awards. And so they like said my name and like the person in front of me, I have this on video. They say like, Jason Ribeiro, graduating with this degree. And the person started to walk in front of me as if like the statement was over. And then it was like this litany of like all these awards. Also the recipient of this and this and this. And then the person was just kind of like in limbo, like, oh, I shouldn't move.
No man's land.
No man's land. And I'm just sitting there kind of like head down, like this is embarrassing. But then I'm like, okay, battery in my back to do the PhD, to be undeniable. Wow. Again, something I didn't think that was even open to me. That's how I moved to Calgary. I was loving life in Toronto. I was still commuting back and forth from Brock to Toronto and St. Catharines to Toronto.
Yeah.
But there was a supervisor again, brilliant guy, had been very successful in business. But you talk about change, you talk about moments, really successful in the energy business, hung it up at a certain point, became a teacher, became a principal, became a superintendent, now works at the intersection of technology and major technology investments and education. And there's only one of those guys in the country. And I said, I'll move across the country for that guy. And moved here 2015, right as the bottom fell out, by myself, didn't know a single person. I knew a friend of a friend who used to live in our student house the 1 year I lived at Mac. And he helped me move in. And I was grateful. Calgary Place Apartments, right near the C train. And sight unseen, got the apartment, IKEA furniture everywhere. And I just said like, listen, I'm just going to run this however it needs to be. Like, I don't know what this looks like. I don't know what the end goal is. I was consulting a little bit. So I was on a plane a lot. And again, that was a new exciting thing for me. But I, again, had no, like, I'm going to finish my PhD. I had this sort of very bullish idea that I was going to finish it in 4 years. I'm coming up on year 7 now. But at the tail end, I'm knocking on wood right now.
I have a feeling you'll get there.
Yeah. But it was because all of these beautiful things happened in between. So community sort of wraps its arms around me. 2016 moment was for me seeing what was happening in the United States, and then feeling the responsibility of saying like, hey, there's a very ugly side of politics that is coming up and it's going to impact all forms of community. You're now in these rooms internationally. I was doing like this diplomatic work. I was like consulting with all these major institutions. I'm doing my PhD. And I'm like, what responsibility do you bear to sort of ameliorate some of these concerns? What responsibility do you, as someone who sees this coming, have to get involved and contribute to society? Because my goal was always to move back to Toronto. And the community started to embrace me to the point where I started to see all 4 corners and was like, whoa, there's something special here. Like my daddy's name didn't mean anything back in Ontario. Certainly didn't mean anything here. But the willingness for people to have this coffee or sit down for this conversation or hear your story or you hear theirs, unbelievable. And so I said, I remember to my partner, we were in this long distance relationship. She was finishing her master's at Western. I said, I'm staying. I'm here. Convinced her to do her PhD out here. Wow. And so yeah, the embarrassing part is that my wife started her PhD after me and has finished before me. So I'm very proud spouse, but also a very dejected competitor.
Keeps you going.
Yeah. But yeah, certainly I think I'm in awe of her because she's done a lot of really great, amazing work. But
that's a big ask.
Yeah.
For
100%.
And I'm sure she didn't know Calgary, didn't really like...
Zero.
Yeah.
You're talking about the most family-oriented, close-to-home person. And her and my relationship having evolved to, over years, like seeing me through a pretty dark time. And to have the trust to say, I'm not just going to put my sort of faith in this individual as a partner. I'm going to put my career trajectory, because she could have gone to Ontario and there, maybe depending on her program, schools that were better positioned for her. Yep. Like I'll always be indebted to her for doing that. But also for seeing like, there was something weird that was happening with me in the city. Like I didn't know what it was. Like I was finding myself in like broadcasting, like on television, like things that I just like, never.
How? Like what you were just, talented, obviously, because you get that. That's like, that gets you into sure. places. Just in the right circles, right time, right place. Like or you were just moving through the world in such a way that you were just creating opportunities.
I think part of it was the city. Like the city puts you in positions, and the city puts you in, if you embrace community, relationships, like how you built this platform, you'll find yourself in these things. I think that was number one. Number two, I think people appreciated the fact that here was someone who was so community minded, but hadn't been here for a decade and came with a lot of baggage. Like no one knew me. So I'd just come to these rooms and I'd have very like passionate advocacy positions on particular things. And people would say, hey, you should come join this committee or come join this board. Or like people were super welcoming that way. And I'm sure they are to a lot of people, and people just don't walk through that door once it's opened.
Yeah.
And I was like committed to walking through it. I said yes, probably more often than I should, but I said yes. And so, yeah, that was the another thing. It was like, okay, so there's, political commentary or public affairs. I was sort of advocating for positions on community, but think about who forms the makeup of a political commentator. It's either a professor, which again has a very specific kind of commentary that may resonate with some, may not resonate with others. Two, someone who's in the employ of a political party, so they're wearing their stripes quite viscerally. Or third, it's someone who has worked for a political party and is no longer. So I was someone who like had none of that. Yeah,
it's like off the board.
And I just studied, like I mentioned, like 2016, what was happening with Trump and what was happening in the United States and the fragmenting of society and community and geopolitically how things were changing. And I was doing all this diplomatic things. So I had enough of the jets and just a keen interest in politics to the point where people said, like, just give this guy a shot. And I think from there, I just sort of made the most of the opportunity. I said, like, hey, I'm going to come correct. I'm going to research my positions, which frankly, a lot of people don't do. But also I'm going to be disciplined enough to say, like, I care about the person that's on the other end of the television screen or on the other end of the radio in their car. I'm not here so you buy into me. And I think that's a very different thing when you think about like this hot take world we're in. You get personalities that are built off of giving you their hot take. And the more incendiary, the more, sort of boisterous that position is, the more clicks you get, the more engagement you get, the more likes you, and you build a brand off of that. I already had like other things going on. So I said my role in doing that commentary and broadcasting side was, I just need to give you the straight goods as best as I can see them. Like not in some weird, like I'm going to call it down the middle way. I'm not going to veer too left, veer too right. I'm just going to give you my opinion. You're either going to like it or you're not. But I will not compromise the fact that I care about the average person who's not, paying attention to all of this nonsense. And I think that's another differentiating factor. I stay away from all of these people like that. Like I don't even know these guys like that. And I think a lot of people are like really into like talking to people and being in the inner circle and getting tips and, hot take news. And I care about the average person and how they're viewing it. They don't care about that inside stuff. They care, how does this impact my family? And so I think that perspective also positioned me a lot differently than who was in the mix at the time. So there's that. I'm doing a lot of board work with causes that I care about. And again, like
all in Calgary.
Like
it happened specifically. It happened quick, right?
Super quick. And again, like it's a point of pride. Like I come in, I'm probably the youngest person in the room, but it's also, again, not about me. The goal for me is to socialize that, hey, you think that I'm this special? There are a bunch of other 30-something-year-olds, et cetera, that can add value here. And if I do my job well, it'll make it so much easier for that next person and that next person. And I've seen the organizations I've been involved with evolve just based on the pressure I put on myself to be able to deliver. And I think that's what's always kept this in check for me, is I'll work like an animal. Like I'll go push myself to the limits. But I know that if I hit this right, it will make it so much easier for this next person. And the network that I have, some of the guys that you know and the gals that you know, they're great people. They're amazing people. And sometimes they're not in the rooms that I'm in. And if I can play a role in sort of making that connection point, I better come correct and do my job, because if I mess this up, believe me, it's going to be harder for that other person to have a shot. So I think walking into the rooms, making the most of the opportunities, I think watching and listening. I'm not as good at sometimes asking questions. And I've come to terms with that. I've read books like A More Beautiful Question, like all these kinds of things, because that's, as a board director, you got to do, but also as a really curious person. But I've realized, like, yes, I may not ask a lot of questions, but it's because I'm watching so often and watching and observing in a way that most other people are not also allows you to answer questions for yourself. So that's all happening. PhD humming along. And then I took an executive role with Calgary Economic Development right before the pandemic to lead our economic strategy. And so you're seeing all of these different things, but at the core of it, you go down, because I get this question all the time. How do you do how do all these things fit together? And I'm like, every single one of them has Calgary. Every single one. The commentary, my position is Calgary. Whatever Calgary needs to be better and win, that's the position I'm going to articulate. Like, that's the vantage point I'm going to view these decisions with. Every community board that I'm on, big organizational board I'm on, Calgary's at the core of that. There is a Calgary component to Sport Calgary or the Alberta Motor Association or Education Matters, the charity trust of the CBE. There's at the core of that. Calgary Economic Development, this was a really tenuous point in our city's economy coming out of a challenging 2015, 2016. Economic diversification was on the line. And I said, I'm going to step up for 2 years and take on this executive role because it mattered. And Calgary is very viscerally at the core of it, all the way to now, pro basketball. It's Calgary's at the core of it, right? So
it's so big. It's like this. Yeah.
It's the only, and that's a really amazing privilege. A lot of people who get up, go to work or engage in particular causes, and there isn't that level of clarity or line of sight or through line. And so I get it overtly. It might look a little bit messy, but if you look at it that simply, everything has Calgary and the betterment of the city for it. And I feel such a rarefied, bliss because of that.
It's so, I said earlier, just the short amount of time you've been here. You've been all in head first, deep into Calgary quickly. And these decisions, get on boards and be part of these groups that are focused on community. Was it calculated, or was it just no, I want to be a part of this, and this is the way I'm going to go about it?
Yeah, I think you can't be calculated with what you don't know is possible, right? So the idea that I'm in these circles, or I'm in these groups, or I'm on television and radio, you can't calculate. You can't say, I want to be on TV. It's not possible. You cannot even fathom that, especially now knowing how I grew up.
Yeah.
Where there are situations where, again, one wrong move and I'm not there. Or I probably wouldn't have even put myself in a position so front-facing because I had all this stuff going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's things lurking back there.
Right. So I couldn't do that. So again, this is unfathomable. So there's no calculus, there's no strategy to it. But again, this is the clarity that comes with being purposeful. Calgary's, the city's health and strength and vibrancy and culture is such a motivator for me that maybe it provides that level of clarity that when I do say yes to something, I know whether it's a fit right off the bat or not. But I think as well too, it's also about the fact this is how this city works. And I tell people all the time, you come here, we're doing it now with players that we're signing on the basketball side. It's this may be a blip for you. You may come here into Calgary, and you may go another place. You may go back to Europe to play, etc. But every person may say this about their city. Something different here. So if you look at this through the lens of, hey, I'm going to get really ingrained for the few months that I'm here in community, or I'm going to foster some relationships that, again, with most people put you into those relationships. They say, hey, have coffee with this person. They do this. Other cities don't work like that. It's not a given. I saw Connor say that on the pod earlier. It's special. So as much, again, as this has happened very quickly for me, I can assure you, not calculated, but also such a beautiful reflection of the city that if you want to hit it hard here. And for every one of my sort of story, there's an entrepreneur that's gone from zero to $100 million. There's a person who's done a breakthrough in medical science or in one of our universities. This story, even though this is a very public-facing one, these stories happen all the time. And I think it's such a great, beautiful indicator of this city's strength. So
I agree. I want you to wander down the pro basketball path. Yeah. Because this one is this is, and I'm I'm a sports guy through and through. So I think, I want to know how the hell you came up with this and what's going on.
So big sports guy. Obviously, I'm a big sports fan. Again, unfathomable to think of being,
Dude, it can't even be.
No.
Not in any realm.
No. Again, think about the most commensurate example. So the least accessible examples are the billionaires who own teams, right? The more accessible, but still billionaire that owns it is Jay-Z, right? So it's the most visceral, minority stake in the Brooklyn Nets. I don't even think he has now. That's the only point of reference you really have. growing up. So this is not even in the background of my mind, not even thinking about this. So we go through the pandemic, and a lot of moments happen for me. So, leading this economic strategy with an amazing team that we were able to build, help see Calgary's economy in a really small way, businesses, big and small and large, whatever, through that, supporting them, helping them as best as we could, while also defining, what the rebound might look like. And then I find out we're going to have our first child. And for me, knowing how I grew up, I was one of these guys that didn't really think I was made for kids. I saw this nightmare scenario where I repeated some of those same exact things. And it was my wife and I had open discussions about this even before we were married. Like, I don't think I can't do this. Why would I put a kid through this? I was already sort of saying, even as good as I am now, this is going to be the one thing that might tweak me and I might revert back into something that I'm not proud of. And at a certain point, community at your back, wind at your sails, you get the confidence to say, we can do this. And so we find out we're having our first child. My child is born May 2020, beautiful Mateo. And I'd gotten a lot of advice from people saying, hey, this is your child is going to change everything for you. They're going to be your North Star. It's going to change how you work. It's going to change. I didn't buy that at all for me. I said, this, child is going to fit in within a context that already exists, and I'll have my own relationship with that, but I don't expect it to sort of upend everything. And for the most part, it didn't. Like, I think for the first 8 months, while I was kind of wrapping up my role, because I'd put a hard date on it, I said, I'm coming in for 2 years, here for a good time, not a long time, and I want to hit it hard, and then I'm going to finish up my PhD or do something else. And seeing this boy and how I responded to him and how we responded to each other, and this beautiful, especially during the pandemic, it was just us, like viscerally just us. My wife, being as family oriented as she has, can't even bring her family in. It's just us. And I had the utmost confidence that we would get through it, that we would figure out the routines, we would figure out our stuff, and they were highs and there were lows, but I knew it. And I said, you know what? Of all the things that could be on the horizon, because there were a lot of opportunities and calls and things that were coming my way, I did something that I probably think no one thought that I was going to do. And I said, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to be with my son. And so it was during that point in time where you think about like battery in my back. I'm a driven guy. I'm kind of Kobe-esque. I'm just going to shut it all down. And I did with this boy. And we would wake up every day and I'd look over at him and, what do you want to do today? And like, it was literally like everything was possible. And that perspective sort of framed to me like, hey, what I do next is going to be impactful. It's not just going to be the next thing, the bigger chair or more eyeballs. It's going to be impactful. I don't know what that is yet. But in the interim, let me enjoy this beautiful time with my son. And then I'm going to wrap up my PhD and then we'll go. And so that lasted about 8 months till August 17th, 2022, I guess it was. And we find out, it was my birthday actually, and I hate my birthday. Find out through this press release that this team is coming. And so in the background of my mind, I see this press release that a team is moving to Calgary. And all these diverse interests that I've had, which seemed messy, seemed a little bit directionless, all of a sudden filtered again into one. The same thing with quitting the cigarettes. All of a sudden became one. I'm a huge advocate for sport. Sit on the board of Sport Calgary. I got broadcasting and media background experience, hugely involved in art and fashion and those kinds of aspects of that world of professional sports. Know our city's economy really, really well, and how film is taking off.
Understatement.
How all these things are sort of trending, and being like, it has to be us, and not out of like indulgence and bravado, but just like, I know exactly what to do with it. And the us in this was my friend and now business partner. I just screenshotted that press release. What
did the press release say? Was it the league was coming to Canada?
It was the league had existed, and there was already sort of entering its 5th season.
Okay.
And so OVO and Drake and his friends had owned the Scarborough team. You'd had another independently owned team in Vancouver. And then the others were kind of the MLS model, league owned. Okay. And so it was being launched as a league owned team. And I just read that and it was just like the complete anathema to Calgary. Like that, how could you top down bring this in? It has to be from the community and from trusted members of community. So screenshotted it. I texted my friend Usman and I said, are we doing this? And he said, yeah. That's simple. Because again, it's that moment where we both knew everything that we would bring to this. And so we, got in touch with the league. There were already interested parties that had been playing the long game on this. They'd run a test at Winsport actually in March where they brought an international tournament here just to see if it would work. And for 3 days they had like 1,000 people there, which was interesting to me. And it was one of those things in my NBA group, like we'd thought about going, but then had conflicts and didn't go. Yeah. And I remember seeing the reports being like, 1,000 people, it's not bad in rainy March, for a tournament that you've never heard of with teams you've never heard of. And so that was in the back of my mind. And then that sort of launched this very intense 2 months from August 17th to standing in front of the entire country, October 19th, launching the team. So there's no overlay. Like there's no existing professional sports business that we're overlaying onto. We have 2 months to earn the trust of the league, our partners at the league, stand up at least a skeleton infrastructure, and then prepare for launch, all in 2 months. And so it was intense, but it was such a beautiful, frenzied experience to bring that to Calgary. And then we're standing in front of the masses October 19th, announcing this team. But like in the back of my mind, even as we were doing it, supremely confident that we knew what we were doing, even though we'd never done it before, because it wasn't basketball that we were selling. It wasn't professional sports. It was Calgary. We were just showcasing Calgary that we know in our bones. And that's probably why I stay as close to the street and community as possible. Because if I lose that perspective, I'm done. Yeah. That was it.
Crazy. What, like, it's all super fresh, right? Like this is like,
it just happened.
Yeah.
Like a few months ago.
Yeah. And to just have the confidence, or just like, that moment where everything just becomes crystal clear, you just trust it. And then, I don't know. Where do you even start to figure it out? How do you build a team? How do you pay for all this? All of it.
Yeah. I think part of it was we knew Calgary, so we knew what it needed to look like for Calgary, how it needed to be positioned, what contrast we needed to draw between us and other groups in the city. But then, you have to build an amazing team. And it's me sitting here with you today, but with me is this amazing team, an amazing group of people, a few of which we brought over from the previous franchise in Guelph, who are incredible. Been with the league a long time, knew how to fill in those gaps. A couple people that we've brought on that we had existing relationships with, and then folks that we brought in new. But again, every detail of that launch didn't have to be really spoken. So I called Andrew Fung and I said, you got to do the hype reel. Come on, buddy. And as gracious and as thoughtful as he is, did the hype reel for us. I knew that certain things that other sports teams don't do. I knew what I didn't want. That's another huge thing in my life is, again, you go back to I'm cognizant. I don't ask a lot of questions. It's because I watch a lot. Yeah. So I know what every other professional, you Google this. Back when I was a kid in that room, there's only so many things you can do. So I had the home computer in my room. So I was just there for days and days researching and looking at things ever since I was a kid. So now Google, you'd be surprised how many people use Google improperly. There's advanced searches, all these things that you can do. I looked up a bunch of sports launches, and in every single scenario, I saw two men behind a skirted table, wearing suits, holding up jerseys with their own name on it. I said, we can't have that. That's not us. That's not Calgary. And ours, by contrast, was, I remember we're the day before launch, I said, so we're going to, in the middle of the press conference, after the sort of hype video is kind of played and the team logo is revealed, we're actually going to stop the press conference. And we're going to bring out these kids from Jack James High. And we're going to get them our swag and all, no one's ever seen this before. And the official photo that goes out is going to be us and these kids. And I remember someone saying to me, you can't stop a press conference midway through. The media will go. I said, they'll wait. And you don't understand. Take the picture after. They'll wait. And I remember we played, got the DJ to play a song, and it was this beautiful moment where everyone just got to take a pause. We just announced the name, just announced the logo and the colorways. And you see these kids that have never been to WinSport before, ever, now in the part of a national launch of a professional sports team. And that was the photo that ran in the National Post. That was the photo that went everywhere. And I was like, that's Calgary.
And Calgary, but right beside that, is community.
Community.
Which is like, that's what you do
synonymous.
over and over and over and over.
Right. And then we set values, right? Like that's the mark. And so everything that we've done from then has been with those instincts in check, because believe me, Kobe has this amazing quote. He says, when he's building out his team and he's seeing people practicing and maybe not practicing or whatever, he's like, listen, guys, if we don't win a championship, they're not going to come to you. They're going to come to me. So we have this pressure test. Like, I'm out in community so much. If we're not getting something right, we will know. Like, I will hear it. And that's good. And I will hear it and I'll protect us from that. But then we got to reconcile that. And so far, because we've kept our instincts at Calgary and not so much on, hey, a pro sports team has to do this or a pro sports team has to we haven't even for the last few months had, public pricing for season tickets. And we're looking at a venue that's already third sold out and we don't even have tickets out. So all the rules that we've tried to undo, we launched this thing called the Home Team Tour where, we talk about community, right? What's our brand? What's our tagline? And we talked about feeling like home. Home is this thing that cuts across every language. And, very viscerally early in this conversation, I can talk about when home doesn't feel like home. But when home is at its purest, it's welcoming, it's inviting someone into your home. That's what we're kind of doing when we're inviting people to our games. And that means so many different things, but all good to a lot of people. And so how do we become the home team for Calgary? And there's a Jay-Z double entendre with sports there, but with all of our brand. But we went to all four corners of community when we launched after, and went to an event at Genesis Center, went to a sold out girls tournament in the Southeast, all across, and said, hey, what are you guys doing that's cool with basketball? We'll come, we'll bring a DJ, we'll give out prizes. And we captured these visuals where I don't know that I've seen kids as pumped up for anything just for watching their own local high school team, let alone what they're going to say for a professional team. So at its core, community is the brand. Yeah. We may package it in a very slick and inviting and cool and double entendre way, but let's be clear, as much as we're selling basketball, we're selling Calgary. And that's something I think we feel very comfortable doing.
Dude, I that video that you put out the other day with all the high schools, the very first shot is St. Mary's.
Yep.
And that's where I went.
Get out.
Yeah. So you can imagine what that did to me,
for
right?
you.
Yeah. And I didn't play basketball, but that, and I'm a marketing dude.
Yep.
So I'm watching what you're up to, and I can it's brilliant.
Appreciate that.
And I don't, it's such a unique way to go about it. And like you said, you haven't released prices. You haven't released, usually when somebody does something, the first thing they do is here's how much my thing is.
It's a this and it costs this.
Yeah.
Right.
This community approach, dude, it's gonna be exhausting, and just to get to get through Calgary at that level, it'd be cool to watch. But
it's crazy, and thank you. It's super intentional, right? And
where's that? Sorry,
go ahead.
Where does that come from? I know it's everything. A lot of your choices are community driven.
Yeah.
But to start a pro team that's community driven, and then actually to have all these ideas and follow through and actually do it, is different.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think nothing puts a battery in your back like running out of runway for time. We know that we're going to play a game on May 27th. So, everything flows from that, right?
Yeah.
Give someone a deadline and they're either going to meet it or they're not, or they're going to die trying, right? So we're going to die trying. So I think that's been helpful. I think the other thing too is because we felt so well positioned to do this, think about the time it also saves.
Yeah.
So I'm not in a marketing meeting for hours. I'm literally going to the freelancer and saying, home team, we're going to four corners. You see it in the wings of the logo as well. These four corners. We're one of the few cities that quadrants ourselves out with Northwest, Southwest, etc. So let's unite that. Let's unite that like the logo. Let's play off of that. And so at the core of it, right? I'm a community guy. So I'm a community organizer, community advocate. So that's the way I would look at it. The marketing stuff, that's sprinkles.
Yeah.
So the ability to say, hey, that's what that needs to look like. There's no time for this. There's no time for temperature testing. There's no time for market research. We're either going to get kicked in the teeth on this or we're not. And we're willing to get kicked in the teeth on it because we believe in this so much.
Yeah.
And I think people are at least resonating and giving us probably a little bit of goodwill to say, I see what you're doing. I see that, we're having this celebration with hundreds of people at the Genesis Center in Northeast. And not even to really do anything other than to just like, hey, our general managers in town, our senior advisors in town, and again, rather than hold some stuffy press conference or some big sort of ticketed dinner, we're just going to go to the Genesis Center. Yeah. And we're going to get, face painters and kids, and because we know there are hundreds of people just there in community anyways. And all of a sudden they're engaging with us, not even really knowing what this is. And I got to tell you, to give deference to this person, I probably had one conversation with someone outside of my business partner as we were making the deal. And it was super instructive. And he's a beautiful person, one of my dearest friends. Marketing guy, though, but community guy, right in the wheelhouse that we're talking about. And he said to me, he's like, yeah, there's going to be some marketing things that you need to do. But he's just like, the way that I think about it is you're filling the tank. Coffees, meetings, networks, all of these kinds of things for the next several months. And then you're going to get to a point where as you're doing this, you're going to know what it looks like, even implicitly, just through these conversations. Because you're going to have to talk to people, validate your case, and tell them what you're doing. And they're going to respond to it or they're not. And you'll augment. He's like, I know you. You're listening. So you're going to augment this thing as it goes along based on a success. And then you're just going to hit the gas. And I think we're a couple weeks away now from like pedal to the floor. Player signings that I'm signing privately are going to be public.
Awesome.
Head coach. Cool. But I think if we look back at this season, and again, we're gonna ride or die on this approach.
Yep. And
again, when if we don't win the championship literally, or the championship of what we want to do more amorphously on with this team, I'll hear about it, right? Yep. But I want to look back at the season and say we couldn't be easily pegged as a basketball team.
Yeah.
This was a city building project. Everything from the title sponsor we have, Zeno, I stood, another thing you talk about, how are you able to do this? There's a public accountability and trust that comes with this. So I'm very cognizant of the things I've said in public. Even not having the infrastructure in place yet, I know I need to meet that. So I said at the launch, I said, what company names are people going to see staring back at them when these games are broadcast on a major sports network next year? Who's going to answer that call? Put that challenge out. And the phone sort of rang, but I already knew only three calls I was going to make outbound, 3 to 5 calls. One of them was Kai and Gersh at Zeno. And I said, that name has to be Zeno. In your business, in this moment, at this time, with this overlay of trying to do something different. And let's not diagnose the significance of a clean energy company sponsoring in a major way, one of the largest deals in professional sports in the country, this team. Let's just keep showing and proving and showing and proving. And that's been super exciting to like make that promise and then say promise kept, not as a tick box, but as like, hey, we're doing something different here for sure.
Where does this first year, like performance wise, if the team finishes X, like the pressure of, is there pressure to actually finish at a certain spot, or are you looking at this as like, this is community build? And this is whatever the timeline is, you're going to start attracting these amazing characters to the city that want to play ball here. And in X amount of time, you will be at that final game.
Yeah. So let's be clear. I'm the most competitive guy.
So what are you going to look like? Sorry. What are you going to look like during the game time?
During game time, yeah.
Like if somebody had a camera on you.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just come mess with you and just like hold it on you. Yeah. But how are you going to?
I'll give you a tease, right? So one of the things that I want to do at game time, this is very different for me. So I'm the guy that wants to be looking at everything going like right or wrong. Yep. So I want to be circling and going back and looking from the broadcast booth to this to that. I'm sort of imposing some discipline on myself to, let's say, sit in a seat and watch every game. But also, one of the goals we have is to bring out a great Calgarian to every one of those games. Cool. So the seats that I have are very visible near the scorer's table. Yep. Primarily to bring someone out. So even if I'm like sort of
Just
palms
losing
are
it?
sweaty, I can't.
You're gonna be like cucumber. Just
And even if something doesn't go quite as right, like I have to keep the poker face.
reaction.
Yeah, no reaction. Because like, what am I gonna do? Like, get up and say, hey, I gotta fix this. Like, let's no. So part of that is the trust that I have implicitly in the team that like we'll navigate all this. And I think again, like, you know, I go back to that Genesis Center event. Yes, we're going to do a premier sports and entertainment experience, but some things are going to be messy in the most beautiful ways. So let's allow them to. Like, we're doing this for community. It's done by community. We're trying to elevate that experience. We've done that so far with how we've approached our merch and all these other kinds of things in a way that I don't think Calgary's kind of seen before, at least not in recent memory, where it's kind of cool and restrained and not goofy. And it's, that's clearly a basketball team type of thing. So I'm gonna have to ride that out from a competition perspective. Look, I can't go into it and say like, hey, we got to win a chip in the first year. But that being said, I'm a pragmatist, right? So I'm looking at the information as it comes in and making the best possible decision. So we've hired the right general manager, we've hired the right basketball operations staff. I've given them, I think the appropriate direction to go out and build an exciting and fun team. I think we've got the right head coach for that, who believes both in the pressure to win short term, but also we're building a foundation here. And I just want to look back on the season and be proud that with those available opportunities, we made the most of them. And if that shows in the record or in the playoffs, et cetera, so be it. If it doesn't, believe me, we'll have that first meeting that next day and go through every single reason why to be able to come and get it next year. It'll be relentless. So I'm not as concerned about that. But in the first year, I think the three things that we look at are, number one, can people look back at this and say that this was kind of unique? I think it's important.
Which?
Like this whole season, like that was different.
Which it started off that way.
Right. And we could get really basketball-y really soon. So I want to protect that as well. Right. Like I want to see during the season, I still want music, like artists to appear on our grid. I still want these amazing pop-up collaborations or things that are happening in community. I don't want to lose that because we become a basketball team because we're in the season. I want to continue the year-roundness of that. So that's number one. I want that to be unique for better or for worse. Two, I think we have to look at that on the court sort of perspective to say, hey, did we surpass expectations, meet expectations, fall short? Let's calibrate that. And then the third is just on the business side. Like this is a business, right? And I think from all the things that we're trending now, I think we've hit it correctly. You know, I don't want to flex on some of the other teams in our league, right? Because we're also competitive from that perspective. But I think we're blown away. Like this is not just a uniquely Calgary success in this early stage. This is like a CEBL league leading success perspective, and we're super proud of that and super encouraged by how much the other ownership groups and other businesses and teams feel about what we're doing in Calgary. And so we're standing on their shoulders. They've grinded it out for 4 years to put us in a position to do this. But now it doesn't make sense if we're not going to take it further. So I'm thrilled about that.
So cool, man.
It's crazy.
Just like all of it before we got on camera and started talking, we were talking about Gersh. And the one word that came out of my mouth was special dude. After this conversation, man, you're right there. This has been your willingness to share how reflective you are, your experiences is special, man. Just your perspective on Calgary is like, listen, I'm born and raised here, so this is my place.
Right.
You're playing at a totally different level, and it doesn't matter how long you've been here, but it's going to be cool to watch. When I figured out who you are and what you were up to, I was like, man, there's a lot of things happening. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this.
No, this platform is incredible, and I'll be honest too. Like, I've been reticent about sharing my story, and I've only kind of done it in drips and drabs. And there's this Herald profile that went out where I first started to talk about some of these challenges, but to be able to do it in a little bit more depth, and with someone as sort of gracious as you to allow that space is super special. And so I appreciate you.
Man, this has been one of those, and I knew it was. I said it before. You're like, well, now I don't want to disappoint you. I was like, that's not going to happen. I end the show with one question. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
Wow. I've listened to the pod a couple times, and as much as you can get prepared for that question, you can't. And so very viscerally, my mind goes to two places. One, at its most emotive, which is probably the first reaction I have whenever I hear something. When I think of Calgary, I think of these, again, moments. I think about my son being born at Foothills Hospital. I think about marrying my wife with 2 friends at Jerry Shaw Memorial Garden off Elbow Drive. I think about, especially through our family lens, right? Like when we think about family, sometimes when you say my family, you sometimes look back like to your hometown in the context of a city. The family context that I have is here, viscerally, by choice in this city. And so every time I think of Calgary, my emotions go to, okay, my son was born in Calgary. Like that's a very unique thing. Yourself not included as well in that. And you know how rare that is to be born and raised here. So to know that this new generation is coming here born in Calgary, and just the things that have anchored this experience for the first 3 years of his life, I think of the zoo. I think of the library. I think of all of these little moments I've had with this boy and with our family in this city. So those first things, it's inarticulable. I just see these flashes of this city and my family and just think, my goodness, we've caught the brass ring. Not just from a Canada perspective, but uniquely this city. I'm so proud to be raising my family here. And then the other part of it is like the intellectual part. The moment you talk to me about Calgary, my mind goes in a million different directions just because of all the things I'm involved in. And I stop myself. We're getting to a point in the city, and we have been for this last few years, where we're diagnosing a lot. What is the future of Calgary? What is Calgary's brand? What is Calgary's this? What is Calgary's that? Calgary, justified in relation to some other city. Calgary in relation to this. Stop. I've been involved in those conversations. Build something. Do something. Go give back to this community. Don't worry about how it filters up. Don't worry about how it compares. There are certain people whose jobs it is to do that. But I think for us, start something, build something, get engaged, get involved. I've sort of put Calgary in that perspective so that every time I sort of think about, well, Calgary, where are we trending to? I stop myself and I just say, put someone else in a position to do something. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep amplifying stories, because those are the stories that will matter. Those are the more of the things that will speak to our brand or our city or our direction than any of the other strategies or things that we could concoct. So very simply, that emotive, visceral moments with my family in this city, and then stopping myself from this kind of analysis paralysis of where we're going and just being. That's what I think of when I think of Calgary.
That's a good way to end it. You just keep cranking this thing up. So, yeah, man, I really appreciate this.
No, thanks, Jeff.
And the cool thing is now I just get to watch you build this monster, whatever it's going to turn into, and to catch up with you at this point it's cool for me.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.